So this is the second screen recording for topic B1. This is where we got up to last week, this thing called the paradox of voting. So Amartya Sen's theory was where we got up to last week. Now, to see an example of this thing called the paradox of voting, if you can get the second PowerPoint up, it should look like that. What is a just way for solving problems? Talk a little bit more in this PowerPoint about about resolving problems. So the second slide is as I say, common kind of problems I would think that you guys should be hopefully used to now. You might have two cases that look similar, and you've got two offenders committing the same type of crime. So as it says, it might seem fair to punish them in the same way, but I think it is important that we take this on board from now on, that treating like cases alike may and sometimes actually be injustice. So you've got two examples on there in terms of reasons for the offence. That one there. Is it really right to treat the two drivers in the same way when they've got the next slide on page 3 just tries to encourage you to think that you could apply these dilemmas to other issues. So instead of who gets the flute, you could be looking at say things like tax rebates. Who gets the tax rebates? Which section of the community is entitled to things like that? In regards to speeding, it doesn't just have to be speeding, it could be other criminal offences. So this PowerPoint's trying to get you to recognise that these problems are real problems that exist in many different situations. So the fourth slide is where we get to the problem with voting. This is an example of when having a vote might not actually lead to a solution. So what we're trying to get across is that voting might seem simple, but there are times when voting isn't the right approach. I mean, just for an example, in terms of general elections in England, the winning party normally gets between 40 and 45% of the vote. So that generally means that there's more people that didn't want the government than actually do want the government. So recognising democracy isn't this thing that gives the majority their way, because if the majority had their way, they wouldn't have that government. So only once in the last 70 years has a government won more than 50% of the vote. The current government in 2019, even though it won a landslide election, still only got around in the 40%. So the majority of people didn't want the government. I mean, another problem is what happens when the vote is split. So this example of Anne, Bob and Carla, they're arguing about what musical instrument they want the parents to buy. So the X, the Y and the Z, these are all musical instruments that, and they've all got different choices. This example shows that is where you have a ranking system. So, Anne prefers X to Y and Y to Z, and similarly, you've got the different rankings there. Some other countries have this as a way of electing their political parties, that you rank your parties in preference. But even in a case like that, where you have a more developed electoral system, things can still be tied, things can still be equal. So in that sense, democracy is what you might think it is, might not actually be achievable. Now, you don't need to worry about this at all, but this is that example there that I've just said about voting being split when people can rank the different choices is what Sen was on about when he mentioned this thing called the paradox of voting. You don't need this background information, but just if you're interested in it, Condorcet was one of the scholars who challenged the idea of democracy. That was in the aftermath of the French Revolution. Now, if you remember from semester 1, the French Revolution was in the years of, say, around about 1789. If you remember, we had the 89 pattern, and it was when the world became modern. And we didn't, not literally, but, that's what we were trying to get you to think of. 1789 for modernism, 1989 for post. So, if simple voting isn't the answer, the answer to everything, then it is important that we need to be thinking about what is the best form of theory, the best theoretical approach. So you've got the views of John Rawls, in this lecture, building on what we did last year. You've got the views of Amartya Sen that we mentioned last week. Now, in this part of the lecture, when we're looking at the actual systems, then you've got just scrolling down, we've got a large table that's coming soon. Now, please don't worry about this. Most of it you'll be familiar with. These aren't your big theories of criminal justice. These are ideas for how justice systems should work. So the ones in grey are the descriptive ones. So they describe the reality of what the system actually does. So you've got the bureaucratic model, the stigmatisation model, and the power model. Yeah, so they describe the approach. Whereas further down on the table, you've got the normative approach. Now, when you have a normative approach, then that is a claim that what the system should be doing. Yeah, so it should be emphasising crime control, or it should be emphasising. At the table, you'll see this thing called the freedom model of Sanders et al. 2010. So this is the approach. It requires preference to the goal that is likely to enhance freedom the most. So at face value, that sounds really good. I mean, who could argue against that approach? However, there is a fairly long quote here from Richard Garside, with a link from where it came from, basically saying that it's hard to see the difference between this freedom approach and, as it says there, a utilitarian approach. Remember, a big problem with utilitarianism is that you can't count things accurately. So people have said, well, Garside particularly would believe that the Sanders model suffers from the same problems as utilitarianism. So yeah, that's all that we need to do. So you don't need to go into it in as much detail as you would do, say, with Amartya Sen or John Rawls. But it's another example of how big theories are often flawed in this area. So that's the point there. Now, you have got these two theories here, but I also want to point out another theory that if you want to impress and read around, then if you get chapter 4 of Case et al. So those of you that have got it, hopefully this will look familiar. And there's this approach here called communitarianism. Now, what communitarianism is, this is a big theory. This is the idea that that justice should be, well, as you can see there. They would criticise the theories that we've mentioned up to now as being too focused on individual rights and freedom. So instead, it's looking at the second paragraph. Communitarians emphasise social order by protecting and nurturing communal bonds. So rather than left-wing or right-wing solutions, they ignore the social